Okay, awesome. Welcome to the second land use code learning session. Oop, I'm gonna quiet this. Sorry, we're getting started a few minutes late. We just got out of a really great stakeholders meeting for the code rewrite. The purpose of these learning sessions is to create an educational tool for residents to better understand what is a land use code, what is included in Silverton's land use code, what changes does the master plan call for in our land use code, and how might our land use code change during this rewrite process. And the goal is really to create a shared language and understanding that can be applied to community-wide conversations on the land use code update. And so tonight we will be discussing environmental constraints to development. We have Gabby from Clarion, and Ann Miller from DOLA to help with tonight's discussion, and I will let them introduce themselves as we get to their part of the presentation. But thank you guys so much for being here. And then a quick overview of tonight's agenda. We'll review the master plan, go over an overview of Silverton's environmental constraints, the development process, environmental constraints, policy in other communities, and then imagining a new way to mitigate. And then we'll end with a quick land use code rewrite update from Gabby. Let's see here. Okay. So the master plan was the inspiration for the land use code update. That was one of the big things that came out of the master planning process. Additionally, the master plan calls for more efficient and predictable development review and permitting process, clarifying environmental protection and constraints within the code. And finally, the master plan calls to address code barriers to housing. And then a quick overview of Silverton's environmental constraints. So we have our hazard districts, and most prominently, we have our avalanche hazard district. There are a total of 461 parcels that are impacted by the avalanche hazard district. And the development process ranges, depending on where you are within the district. You may have to send in an avalanche study or architectural plans designed to withstand the impact pressures of your zone. And then all development within the avalanche hazard district is subject to review. And then we have our flood hazard district. We actually just updated this map last year. We got a new map from FEMA, which reduced this district. So right now we have 43 parcels impacted. And then all development is subject to a town review, as well as going through FEMA's process. Next, we have our steep slope hazard district. And this is all land within town which contains slope in excess of 25%. And all development in this district is subject to review and requires a geotechnical survey to discuss mitigation efforts in the development. And there are 109 parcels impacted. And then finally, we have jurisdictional wetland areas in town. So currently the town at midnight tonight has no regulations over wetlands. However, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers does. So if a property has jurisdictional wetlands on it, they're required to pull a Clean Water Act Section 404 permit. And if a property owner is unsure, they should hire a qualified wetland practitioner to evaluate the parcel for wetlands and send that information over to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to make the final legal determination on whether the wetland is jurisdictional or not. And if it is, they'll have to go through the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers process. And so just reviewing, a lot of town is impacted by our hazard districts. So this is a very important part of our code update to consider. And as I noted, besides wetlands, all of our hazard districts, you have to go through an application process. And this is a quick overview of what that looks like. However, our first learning session went over the application review process. So if you want more information, you can go watch that, that first learning session or contact me if you have any questions. And with that, I'll hand it over to Ann Miller from DOLA to talk a little bit about planning for hazards.
Hi, thanks for having me. Yes, my name's Ann Miller, and I'm the director of the Colorado Resiliency Office. We're located in the Colorado Department of Local Affairs. And I want to commend the town for proactively planning for the future and thinking ahead for reducing your risk, and all of the good news I've been reading about you on your resiliency planning efforts around energy resilience. So I'm excited for you about the outcome of this land use update. So I'm here to talk high level about a great resource for Colorado communities, and it's an interactive website that we developed several years ago after the 2013 floods to help other communities really have the tools at hand to reduce their risk to natural hazards. So this is it's called Planning for Hazards Land Use Solutions for Colorado. So it's very appropriate for the effort that you're undertaking. So I will do a very high level overview of the guide and then talk about 4 examples and a few communities that are using these land use tools. And then Gabby's going to get into some of the more detailed discussions of that. So this will be a very high level overview. Next slide. So as I mentioned, this is a website, planningforhazards.com. Go check it out. You can search by different hazards and then different land use tools. We also, on this website, have some model land use codes that could be a good reference as well. And each of the tools has a kind of a easy to understand, like, how does this work? How do you implement it? Who's doing it? What are some other resources? So again, this is just an overview for you to hopefully go out and take a closer look yourself. So I'm going to start with, next slide, talking about overlay zone. And we've already just heard that you are very familiar with overlay zones and is a common land use tool to reduce risk to a number of different hazards. So you're already doing this, and it may be something that you are interested in looking at, the wildland-urban interface, and Gabby will be talking about that a little more as well. And there's some great interactive maps that the Colorado State Forest Service has, a wildfire risk viewer that you can look and kind of understand, wow, what does Colorado look like in terms of wildfire risk? And what does my community look like? So this tool is to basically overlay, as was mentioned, some additional code restrictions to reduce that risk and your overlay to your residential zone or commercial zone or whatever. So Jefferson County, they have an overlay zone on geologic hazards, and Glenwood Springs is another example regarding floodplain overlays. There's also good examples in Colorado Springs of wildfire. We'll talk about that in just a moment. So the next slide, please. Stream buffers and setbacks. So this land use strategy is basically providing some protection to property and to your natural resources and ecosystems to protect areas along stream corridors. And some communities have, like in Pitkin County, have enforced a buffer of 100 feet from the high water line. And you're looking at reducing risk in the future. There's also ways that you can mitigate that risk too. So these land use strategies can be tailored to meet the need of your communities. There's not a one size fits all, but another tool to have in your toolbox. Next slide. As I mentioned before, Colorado has been paying quite a lot of attention to our growing wildfire risk in the state. We, in fact, have a wildfire code resiliency board that was set up by the legislature last year, and that large board made up of fire chiefs and local planners and all kinds of experts from around the state are working hard right now to look at some statewide direction to reduce our risk in our communities that are surrounded by some of this wildfire risk areas. So the Wildland Urban Interface Code, there is an international code, so that is available for communities to adopt or tailor as part of the international code, WUI code. And yeah, there's lots of good examples out there. In fact, it is a trend that we're seeing. So Colorado Springs has led the way early on with some of this code work because they've experienced some unfortunate losses due to wildfire. And more communities are paying attention. So the most recent, Gunnison County recently adopted a WUI code, and then Loveland did. So those are a couple more recent examples of communities that have chosen to take this approach. And so it can look at, wild ignition resistant building materials, vegetation management, so having that defensible space around property, and density, location, water supply, all of those things come into play. Next slide. Conservation easements. This is more of that partnership approach. So this tool really looks at putting some restrictions and protecting open space and sensitive areas that are often also prone to hazards. And sometimes it might be that stream corridor or forested area. So this is a tool for local governments to partner with community land trust and private landowners to protect sensitive environmentally sensitive areas that also have the benefit of reducing your risk as well. I think there's a good example that is, I think, a example of how beneficial some of these proactive strategies can be. And I'm going to, so in 2003, Colorado Springs, they coordinated with a subdivision called the Cedar Heights subdivision and a local land trust to protect about 300-acre park with a conservation easement. And that was really to buffer against, the wildfire risk to a community. And this easement actually allowed for fire mitigation work to take place on 100 acres of this park in combination with the defensible space around homes. And it was credited with helping to save the neighborhood from the 2012 Waldo Canyon fire. So that is kind of testimony to the value of really being thoughtful about how can you could reduce your risk and really be thinking about how you develop and protect the wonderful community you live in. So I will end, I think that was the last one, and pass it over to Gabby, I believe. And we are a resource to support your communities and your resiliency planning. And you can find out more about our office at coresiliency.com as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Anne.
All right. Yes. Thank you, Anne. My name is Gabby Hart. I'm a senior associate with Clarion, and we are working on the Silverton Land Use Code rewrite. So building off of what we've heard from Lucy about how the town currently addresses environmental hazards, and then from Anne about some general examples of planning for hazards, we have a great opportunity through this land use code rewrite project to imagine a new way to mitigate. Next slide, please. Why is this an important topic to address? The Compass Master Plan emphasizes the need for environmental land use policies to protect the town. And then the town has also completed other related planning efforts that have a similar focus, including the San Juan County Resiliency Plan, which really makes it clear that Silverton's geographic location, topography, and climate are very unique, and all of those combine to make development and protection of sensitive lands a very big challenge. And that is where the land use code can help. Next slide. So as Anne mentioned before, some of this is going to be repeat information, but it's important to emphasize. So there are really two main ways that we can think about environmental hazards in the land use code, and that's through overlay districts and site-specific standards. And I'm going to walk through the advantages and the challenges of each. So starting with those overlay districts, which are mapped areas where an additional layer of standards apply to development in addition to base zoning district requirements. The advantages of using overlay districts are that they provide additional protection for defined hazard areas without negotiating on a case-by-case basis. They allow existing zoning regulations to be superseded or complemented to solve a known problem, and they are relatively easy to maintain. Some challenges with overlay districts include the need for having trained planning and engineering staff to develop those initial maps and the standards that apply within those areas. It adds an additional layer of requirements to the development review process, and it does require that technical mapping of hazard areas. Next slide, please. Moving into the site-specific hazard assessments, these are applied to sites where hazards are potentially present or known through previous mapping efforts. The advantages to this approach are that it's the best way, and sometimes the only way, to identify hazards on a site and determine the specific methods for how to mitigate those hazards. It can highlight potentially hazardous conditions prior to any development occurring, even if it wasn't on a specific map. And it provides an important educational component for discussing solutions to addressing known hazards. And then two of the major challenges with requiring these site-specific standards or hazard assessments are that they do require upfront time and resources from both the applicants and the local government. And in conjunction with that, it requires specialized technical expertise that may result in additional costs for either the applicant or for the town based on needing to hire outside professionals. Next slide, please. As part of the land use code rewrite, we'll be exploring the idea of establishing these environmental design standards. So these would replace the overlay districts with a set of standards and review criteria for development proposed within hazard areas. There would be separate procedures and applications for development, such as a flood hazard permit or an avalanche hazard permit, so on and so forth. And then hazard maps would be available for general reference if those existed, but they wouldn't be applied to the zoning map as an official overlay district. Next slide, please. So Anne alluded to this, but there's also an opportunity through this land use code rewrite to incorporate additional standards that address other natural hazards that are not currently addressed. So first is wildfire, and that the top picture actually is a screenshot from the wildfire risk viewer that Anne mentioned that shows the different intensities of wildfire risk. And the San Juan Community Wildfire Protection Plan generally supports any protective measure to keep humans and buildings safe from wildfire in the county. But it does specifically include the goal to protect Silverton's water supply on Bear Creek from wildfire. So to support those general and specific goals, the land use code can include requirements, including things like fire-wise planting standards. And those are requirements that address things like the type of plant material, as well as the design of landscaped areas. It can also include defensible space standards, and that's the graphic on the bottom. And what defensible space standards do are they try and create a buffer between building structures and then surrounding wildland area. And then also the requirement to submit a fire hazard study when new development is proposed to ensure that either it's not located in a high intensity zone, or that if it is, it's sufficiently prepared to withstand wildfire or avoid it. Next slide, please. The land use code can also address geologic hazards, and geologic hazards are those features or phenomena of the natural environment that can cause harm to people and property. And so that includes a variety of potential hazards, and that's captured on the screen using Montrose County as an example, which has some similar elements of topography as Silverton and San Juan County. So everything from corrosive soils to landslide hazards and rockfall hazards. And just by way of reference, the Colorado Geological Survey offers assistance to local governments in everything from mapping hazards to land use review to creating mitigation plans. You can see that Montrose County did a full geological hazard report with the Colorado Geological Survey. And so all of that is available should the town decide to pursue adding these types of regulations. Next slide. And finally, wetlands. Most Colorado wetlands are only regulated at the federal level, but some cities and counties have established stricter wetland regulations or policy. And those regulations can range in their specificity and overall stringency. But a common regulation example involves establishing minimum buffers between wetlands and proposed development. So there are a variety of resources available specific to wetlands mapping, and that includes the National Wetlands Inventory, the Colorado Natural Heritage Program, the Army Corps of Engineers, and then also U.S. Fish and Wildlife Center. So the Colorado Wetland Information Center collects a lot of this information on their website. If you are interested in learning more, I encourage you to check that out. Next slide. Taking all of that into consideration, there are really three main goals when establishing a new way to mitigate in the land use code. First is to integrate clear standards to reduce risk by mitigating natural hazards before the hazard occurs. To simplify the process for both staff and applicants, and to balance that additional town review time with additional costs to the applicant. Next slide, please. And then moving on from environmental hazards and to finish up this learning session. For those that may be new to hearing about this project, we wanted to take a few minutes to talk generally about the land use code rewrite and give a general project update. Next slide, please. So the goals of rewriting the land use code are to update the town's regulations to align with the Compass Master Plan, to create more predictable development outcomes, and also to create a user-friendly document with a clear and consistent structure. Next slide, please. So throughout the next 9 to 12 months, we'll be updating the entire land use code, which includes all of the topics on the screen, some of which are completely new to the land use code, some of which are existing sections that may be revised or reorganized to improve the usability of the code. So you'll see that things like the use standards will be addressed, environmentally sensitive lands, as we've just discussed tonight, and then everything else about administration and procedures, so on and so forth. Next slide, please. This is our project timeline. The project team is actively drafting the document in 2 halves, which will eventually be collected into that full draft, which is currently scheduled to be posted in May and then revised again in July, as well as prior to potential adoption hearings based on the public feedback we receive. There will be interim drafts posted in the next few months as the 2 major portions of the draft are reviewed by staff and our stakeholder group. And our stakeholder group is our group of local representatives with development or community experience that are helping guide us through the process. But the real major public outreach events won't be until this summer when we have those full drafts for the public to review. Next slide, please. So in the meantime, if you're looking for more details, you can access the project website through the town's homepage by clicking on the LUDC Rewrite tab. And the project website is where you will find all of the project materials. For example, the annotated outline that we put together for the land use code, or the handouts from our kickoff trip, or the recordings of the learning sessions are also posted there. And it's also where you can sign up for email updates about the project. With that, I will pass it back to Lucy to see if you have anything to add, if I forgot something. But thank you again for everyone listening or attending for your time. We really appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Gabby and Anne, for that. And if anyone has questions, we'll take questions now. So if you're online, you can raise your hand. If there's any in-person questions, we'll take those. Give people a few seconds. Okay, it doesn't look like we have any questions. So we will end it there. But thank you all so much for attending. If you have any questions, please email us, give me a call, come by Town Hall, and we're happy to chat. And we're hoping that this is helpful for people. Our next session will be, I believe, the first Wednesday in February. It'll be noticed in the paper, so you can check that out. And yeah, any closing thoughts from Gabby or Anne? Nope. Okay, awesome. Well, thank you guys very much.
Thank you.